Snow fell thick enough to swallow the world. At the summit of Ridge 17, deep in the Hindu Kush mountains of Afghanistan, 8 soldiers huddled against rocks that offered no real protection from the killing cold. The blizzard had reduced visibility to 30 meters. Winds screamed through the pass at 40 kilometers per hour, driving ice crystals that cut exposed skin like glass. Lieutenant Rachel Brennan pressed her back against a boulder and tried to calculate how long her team could survive. Temperature had dropped to minus 30 Celsius. 2 of her people were already showing signs of hypothermia. Their position had been compromised 4 hours ago, and since then, an enemy sniper had been methodically walking fire through their ranks. 3 shots so far, 3 near misses. The shooter was patient, professional, and invisible somewhere on the opposite ridge. Brennan keyed her radio, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "Command, this is Vanguard 2. We are pinned down on Ridge 17. Request immediate sniper support. We have a hostile marksman with clear line of sight to our position." Static hissed through the speaker. Then a voice came through, tight with frustration. "Vanguard 2, negative on sniper support. All qualified marksmen are 40 clicks out. Weather has grounded air assets. You need to hold position until the storm breaks. Command, we don't have that kind of time. This shooter is going to pick us off one by one." A pause stretched through the static. Then a different voice, older and more measured. "Vanguard 2, be advised. Sierra 37 is not available for this operation. She's been dead for 5 years." Brennan didn't understand the response. She hadn't asked about anyone by name. But before she could request clarification, another shot cracked through the storm. The bullet struck rock 2 meters from Specialist Peters, spraying ice and stone fragments across his position. He rolled away, cursing, checking himself for wounds he'd been lucky enough to avoid. Brennan counted the seconds between shots. 38. The enemy sniper was adjusting for wind, recalculating trajectory, taking his time. Professional, methodical, patient in a way that spoke of years of practice. Unstoppable. "We're going to die up here," someone whispered. Brennan couldn't tell who. The wind distorted everything, turned voices into ghosts and shadows into threats. She was about to respond when the impossible happened. A single shot split the air from a direction that shouldn't have existed. Not from the enemy position on the western ridge. Not from behind them where friendly forces might approach. From above and to the east. From a ridge that intelligence said was impassable in winter conditions. The sound was different from the enemy fire. Sharper, more precise. A crack that cut through the howling wind like a blade through silk. Then silence. Brennan lifted her head cautiously, scanning through the white curtain of snow. No more incoming fire. The enemy sniper had stopped shooting, because the enemy sniper was dead. 743 meters away, through visibility that wouldn't let most shooters see past 30 meters, someone had put a single bullet exactly where it needed to go. "What the hell was that?" Corporal Morrison asked, his voice shaking with something between fear and awe. Brennan had no answer. She was trying to calculate the mathematics of what she'd just witnessed, the trajectory, the distance, the wind compensation required in these conditions. The shot wasn't improbable, it was impossible. Unless the shooter wasn't calculating at all, unless the shooter had spent so many years reading wind and weather that it had become instinct, second nature. Art instead of science. Her radio crackled with a new transmission. A different voice this time. Female. Rough with disuse, like someone who hadn't spoken to another human being in a very long time. "Vanguard 2, this is Sierra 37. Hostile neutralized. You have enemy positions in Sector 7 preparing to move on your location. Recommend artillery strike at 0600 hours. Transmitting coordinates now." The voice cut out. Static returned to fill the silence. Lieutenant Brennan stared at her radio like it had grown teeth. Sierra 37. The call sign command had mentioned. The one attached to someone who'd been dead for 5 years. Behind her, Specialist Nathan Caldwell had gone pale. Not from cold, from recognition. "Lieutenant," he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the wind. "Sierra 37. That was Sergeant Holloway's designation." "Holloway's dead, Caldwell. Operation Broken Ridge. 5 years ago. I've seen the memorial." "I know." Nathan's voice cracked with emotion he couldn't quite control. My brother died in that operation, James Caldwell. He served with her. He paused, struggling with memories that still cut deep. He wrote home about her once, said she was the best shot he'd ever seen, said if everything went to hell, she was the last person he'd want standing next to him. Brennan looked at the ridge above them, searching for any sign of movement through the swirling snow. She saw nothing but white and rock and shadows that might have been anything. But somewhere up there, someone was watching. Someone who wasn't supposed to exist. 5 years earlier, Staff Sergeant Kira Holloway had known the mission was wrong before the first shot was fired. The briefing had been standard on the surface. Infiltrate enemy territory near the Pakistan border. Verify intelligence about a weapons cache suspected of supplying Taliban forces in 3 provinces. Relay coordinates for potential airstrike. Extract before dawn. 4 soldiers plus Holloway's overwatch. Quick in, quick out. The kind of operation they'd run dozens of times across 3 deployments. But Colonel Vivian Ashford had been nervous during the briefing. Not visibly. The colonel was too professional for obvious tells that would alert the soldiers under her command. But Kira had spent 15 years learning to read people through rifle scopes, studying micro-expressions at distances where most people couldn't see faces at all. She'd noticed the tension around Ashford's eyes, the slight hesitation before answering routine questions. The way the colonel's hands moved just a fraction too quickly through briefing materials, as if she wanted to get through the presentation before anyone asked something she couldn't answer. Something was wrong. Kira had mentioned her concerns to Staff Sergeant Kyle Bennett, the team leader, as they'd prepped their equipment in the staging area. Bennett had dismissed her observations with the easy confidence of a man who'd survived 3 deployments through a combination of skill and luck and an unshakable faith in the system. Pre-mission jitters, he'd said, checking his rifle for the 3rd time. Everyone gets them, even colonels. Ashford's solid. She's been running operations in this sector for 2 years without losing a single soldier. Trust the chain of command, Holloway. Trust the chain of command. The words would haunt her for years to come. They deployed at midnight under a sky thick with stars that seemed impossibly distant from the mountains below. Helicopter insertion to a landing zone 10 kilometers from the target. The rotor's thunder fading into silence as the team began their approach. Kira had taken her position on a ridge overlooking the valley, settling into a natural depression in the rock that provided cover and a clear line of sight to Bennett's approach route. Through her scope, she'd watched the 4 soldiers move through the darkness like shadows, professionals who'd trained together until movement became instinct. The ambush came 40 minutes later, too fast, too coordinated, too precise to be anything but planned. Enemy fighters hit Bennett's team from 3 directions simultaneously, catching them in a kill box that had clearly been prepared days or weeks in advance. RPGs streaked through the night, trailing fire. Heavy machine guns opened up from positions that should have been empty according to intelligence. Mortars began dropping with accuracy that suggested pre-registered coordinates, each explosion walking closer to where Bennett's team had taken cover. Someone had told the enemy exactly where to aim. Someone had given them everything they needed to turn this mission into a massacre. Kira had started shooting immediately, her M110 SAS speaking in controlled bursts as she acquired and eliminated targets. 6 hostiles went down in the first 90 seconds, her bullets finding throats and foreheads with the precision that had made her a legend in sniper school. She'd bought Bennett enough time to get his team to partial cover behind a cluster of boulders. But partial cover wasn't enough against this kind of firepower. Not when the enemy knew exactly where they'd run. She'd keyed her radio, requesting immediate reinforcement. Command, this is Sierra 37. Ambush in progress at primary objective. 4 friendlies under heavy fire. Request immediate QRF support. Request emergency extraction. How copy? The reply had been devastating. Negative on QRF, Sierra 37. No support available. Abort mission and extract independently. No support available. Kira had been in enough operations to know that was impossible. There were always contingencies, always backup plans, always someone spinning up helicopters for emergency extraction when things went sideways, unless someone had made sure there wouldn't be. She'd stayed on the ridge, continuing to provide covering fire while her ammunition dwindled round by round. Through her scope, she'd watched the end of everything she'd believed in. Staff Sergeant Kyle Bennett had fought until his magazine ran empty, then drawn his sidearm and kept fighting from behind a burning vehicle. A burst of automatic fire had cut him down mid-reload, his body falling across the rifle he'd carried through 3 deployments. Specialist Megan Shaw had taken a round through the chest while trying to drag PFC Thomas Whitmore to better cover. She'd lived long enough to see Corporal James Caldwell hit by a mortar round that left nothing recognizable behind. Whitmore had been the last. He'd made it 20 meters toward the ridge, toward Kira's position, crawling through dirt and blood before a sniper round had dropped him face first in the dust. 4 soldiers, 4 friends, 4 lives erased in less than 10 minutes while Kira watched through her scope, helpless to do anything but kill enemies who kept coming. Then the ridge exploded. Kira never heard the shot that destroyed her position. One moment she'd been lining up another target, her crosshairs settling on a fighter who was advancing toward Bennett's body. The next, the world was fire and noise and pain beyond anything she'd experienced. The blast wave had thrown her backward, tumbling down a rocky slope that tore skin and cracked bones. Her rifle flew from her hands, disappearing into darkness. Blood filled her mouth, copper and warm. When consciousness returned minutes later, maybe hours, time had lost all meaning. The valley below had gone quiet. Smoke drifted across the killing ground like fog. Bodies lay scattered among burning vehicles, and enemy fighters were moving through the wreckage with methodical purpose, executing anyone who might have survived. Kira had watched through blood-blurred eyes as a man in black tactical gear walked calmly from body to body, putting single rounds into each one. Professional, thorough, making absolutely certain the job was complete. She should have moved, should have engaged, should have done something other than lie there in the rocks while her team was murdered. But her body wouldn't respond. The blast had scrambled something in her nervous system. She could see, she could think, she could feel every broken rib and torn muscle. But she couldn't move, couldn't fight, couldn't do anything but witness. So she'd watched, and remembered, and made silent promises to the dead. When the enemy finally withdrew an hour before dawn, Kira had begun to crawl. Not toward the valley, there was nothing left to save. She'd crawled upward, toward a cave system she'd spotted during mission planning, a place to hide, a place to survive long enough to understand why 4 soldiers had been sent to die. Her rifle was destroyed, the stock scorched black, the scope shattered beyond any repair. Her equipment was scattered across the mountainside. She had a sidearm, a knife, 2 canteens, and injuries that should have killed her. She had 3 choices: die on the mountain, letting whoever had betrayed them win; return to base and face questions she couldn't answer without proof, accusations that would be dismissed as the ravings of a traumatized survivor; or stay dead long enough to find the truth. Kira chose the third option. At Forward Operating Base Copperhead, Colonel Marcus Webb received the news with the kind of controlled stillness that came from 25 years of military service. Operation Broken Ridge. Total loss. 5 killed in action. No survivors recovered. He'd read the after-action report 3 times, looking for something that would explain how a routine verification mission had turned into a massacre. The report offered no answers. Just clinical language describing the recovery of equipment, the identification of remains through dental records and DNA fragments, and the recommendation to close the file and notify next of kin. Webb had trained Kira Holloway. He'd recognized her talent during sniper school at Fort Bragg, had pushed her harder than any other candidate because he'd seen something in her that couldn't be taught. Instinct, patience, the ability to read wind and terrain like some people read sheet music, transforming raw data into art. She'd exceeded every expectation, set records that still stood 5 years later, become the kind of shooter that other shooters told stories about in hushed voices. And now she was dead, killed in an ambush that shouldn't have been possible against a team of her caliber. Something didn't add up. Webb had pulled the mission file, looking for details the after-action report had glossed over. What he'd found had raised more questions than it answered. The operation had been authorized directly by Colonel Vivian Ashford, but there was no supporting documentation, no mission briefing filed with intelligence, no after-action report beyond the brief summary declaring everyone dead. No explanation for why QRF had been unavailable, why extraction assets hadn't been positioned, why a routine mission had been treated with such unusual operational security. The file was thin, too thin for a mission that had gotten 5 soldiers killed. Webb had tried to access related communications logs. Access denied. Classification level exceeded his clearance. He'd requested interviews with the intelligence analysts who'd provided the targeting data. Request denied. Personnel reassigned to classified duties. He'd asked to review satellite imagery from the night of the operation. Access denied. Imagery sealed by order of Colonel Ashford. Doors kept closing. Questions kept going unanswered. And every closed door had Ashford's fingerprints on the lock. At the memorial service, held in Arlington on a gray November day that seemed to weep for the dead, Webb had stood at attention while a chaplain spoke words that meant nothing to empty caskets. They'd never recovered enough of the bodies to bury. Just fragments. Just ashes. Just names on a wall that grew longer every year. He'd noticed Colonel Ashford watching from beneath an umbrella, 30 yards from the ceremony. She hadn't joined the other mourners, hadn't approached the grieving families. She'd simply stood there observing, with an expression that Webb couldn't quite read. Not grief, he'd realized later, something closer to relief. Webb had filed his suspicions away, buried them under the weight of duty and protocol, and the knowledge that accusing a senior officer without evidence was career suicide. He'd signed the paperwork. He'd attended the memorial. He'd written letters to families that tried to give meaning to senseless death, but he hadn't forgotten, and he hadn't stopped wondering. 5 years later, standing in the operations center at FOB Copperhead, listening to a voice on the radio that belonged to a dead woman, Marcus Webb felt something shift in his chest. "Run the authentication code again," he ordered. Specialist Diaz typed rapidly at his console, pulling up encryption databases and verification protocols. "Code validates, sir. Sierra 37 was Sergeant Holloway's designation. Authentication sequence matches her file exactly. Last used November 14th, 2020, the night of Broken Ridge." "That's impossible." Colonel Ashford's voice cut through the room like a blade. She'd arrived 2 minutes after the transmission, summoned by duty officers who knew better than to handle a ghost sighting without senior leadership. "Holloway is dead. This is enemy deception. They must have captured her credentials during the ambush." Webb turned to face her. Ashford looked composed, professional, every inch the decorated officer she'd become in 5 years of steady promotion. But her jaw was tight. Her eyes kept flicking to the radio equipment. And her hands were trembling slightly, a tell so small that only someone watching for it would notice. "The coordinates she provided are accurate," Diaz reported, studying his screen. "Satellite confirmation of enemy positions matching her intelligence. Multiple hostiles in Sector 7, exactly where she said they'd be. If this is deception, it's the most helpful deception I've ever seen." "Could be a trap," Ashford said quickly, her voice rising slightly. "They want us to fire on those coordinates. They've probably staged civilians there for propaganda value. Or it could be exactly what it appears to be." Webb kept his voice neutral, but he was watching Ashford's reactions with the same intensity he'd once used to evaluate soldiers under fire. The way she'd dismissed the transmission without analysis. The way she'd immediately tried to prevent any action. The way she was already building a narrative that would let her bury this. The way she looked scared. "Colonel Webb." Ashford stepped closer, lowering her voice to a register meant to convey intimacy and shared understanding. "I know Holloway was one of your trainees. I know you might want to believe she's somehow still alive. But we buried her 5 years ago. We held a memorial. Her name is on the wall at Arlington. This is enemy psychological operations, nothing more. Don't let sentiment compromise operational security." "We didn't bury her," Webb said quietly. "We never found enough remains to bury. We never confirmed death through any forensic standard. We just stopped looking." Something flickered across Ashford's face, there and gone in less than a heartbeat. But Webb had been reading people's tells for a quarter century. He'd seen it clearly. Fear. Pure, undiluted fear. The radio crackled again. Same encryption, same call sign. "Command Actual, this is Sierra 37. Artillery strike should commence now if you want maximum effectiveness. Enemy forces are preparing to move position at 0630. Window is closing. Vanguard 2 doesn't have much time." The voice was rough, worn thin by cold and isolation. But underneath the damage, Webb heard something he trained himself to recognize over decades of evaluating soldiers under stress. Certainty, competence, truth. He made his decision. Fire mission approved, Webb said. Artillery, commence firing on provided coordinates. Colonel, I'm ordering you to stand down. Ashford stepped forward, her composure cracking visibly. That's a direct command. I am the senior officer in this. With respect, Colonel, Lieutenant Brennan's team is still in danger. This intelligence could save their lives. Webb didn't look at her. He was already keying the artillery net. If I'm wrong, I'll accept full responsibility. But I'm not going to let 8 soldiers die because we were afraid to trust one of our own. Firebase Delta, this is Command Actual. You are cleared hot on Sector 7. Fire for effect. The artillery officer acknowledged. Seconds later, the distant thunder of 150mm howitzers rolled across the mountains, shells arcing through pre-dawn darkness toward coordinates provided by a ghost. Webb watched Ashford's face as the gun spoke. She'd gone pale, her professional mask finally slipping away to reveal something raw and desperate underneath. She looked like a woman watching her carefully constructed world begin to collapse. Sir, Diaz looked up from his console, eyes wide with relief. Direct hits confirmed. Enemy positions destroyed. Lieutenant Brennan reports all hostiles neutralized. Her team is secure. The intelligence had been good, which meant everything else might be true as well. We're receiving another transmission, Diaz said. Sierra 37 again. This time the voice was different, stronger, more present, like someone who'd spent 5 years in darkness and was finally ready to step into the light. Command Actual, I'm coming in. Transmitting approach vector now. Do not engage. I repeat, friendly inbound to your position. ETA 40 minutes. I have intelligence that cannot wait. Webb's hand was steady on the microphone. Copy that, Sierra 37. We'll be waiting. He turned to face Ashford. The colonel had gone completely still, her eyes fixed on something only she could see. Something that looked a lot like the end of everything she'd built. If Sergeant Holloway is alive, Webb said quietly, then we have a lot of questions that need answers, starting with why we declared her dead when we never confirmed it. Ashford said nothing. She simply turned and walked out of the operations center, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. She didn't run. She didn't make excuses. She just left, like someone who knew the game was over. Webb watched her go, then turned to Diaz. Get me everything you can find on Operation Broken Ridge. Original mission files, communications logs, casualty reports, authorization chains, financial records. Everything that exists in any database anywhere. Sir, most of those files are classified above my clearance level. Then find someone with the right clearance. Wake them up if you have to. Webb's voice was steel. If Sergeant Holloway survived 5 years alone in hostile territory, the least we can do is find out why she had to. Outside the operations center, the storm was beginning to break. First light touched the peaks of the Hindu Kush, turning snow-covered ridges pink and gold. Somewhere in those mountains, a dead woman was walking home. The first winter had nearly killed her. Kira Holloway had crawled into the cave system with 3 broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and internal bleeding that turned her urine dark red for 6 weeks. The pain was constant, overwhelming, a companion that never slept and never showed mercy. She'd set her own bones using techniques learned in SEER school, biting down on a wadded piece of cloth to muffle screams that might carry across the valley. The dislocated shoulder had required 3 attempts before it finally popped back into the socket, each failure sending waves of agony through her body that left her trembling and sick. The worst wounds she'd stitched with fishing line salvaged from a dead enemy fighter's pack, working by touch in absolute darkness because she couldn't risk a fire that might give away her position. The needle had been improvised from a piece of wire. The technique had been crude, desperate, just enough to hold torn flesh together while her body tried to heal. The infection had come anyway, despite her precautions. Fever dreams lasted for days, consciousness drifting in and out, while her body fought wars she couldn't see. She'd hallucinated conversations with Bennett, with Shaw, with Caldwell and Whitmore. They'd stood in the darkness of her cave and asked why she'd survived when they hadn't. She'd had no answer then. She had no answer 5 years later. During a moment of desperate clarity, she'd ambushed a 2-man Taliban patrol that had wandered too close to her hiding place. She'd killed them with a knife because she didn't have ammunition to spare. Quick, silent, brutal work that left her covered in blood that wasn't her own. In their medical kit, she'd found antibiotics, basic field supplies, probably stolen from an aid shipment, but enough to turn the tide. The fever had broken 3 days later, leaving her weak but alive. Alive and beginning to understand what survival would require. The cave system became her world. It was extensive, a network of passages carved by water over millennia, connecting chambers that ranged from coffin-tight to cathedral vast. She'd mapped it methodically over months of careful exploration, learning to navigate in absolute darkness, memorizing every turn and drop and dangerous passage. The main entrance was invisible from below, hidden behind a rockfall that looked natural but concealed a passage wide enough for a person to pass through sideways. She'd improved the concealment over time, adding stones and debris until even someone standing 10 meters away would see nothing but mountainside. She'd established supply routes to abandoned positions across the region. American, Afghan, Taliban, it didn't matter. Anything left behind became potential survival equipment. Ammunition, food, medical supplies, communications gear, clothing, tools. The mountains were littered with the debris of 20 years of war. Kira learned to read that debris like a language, identifying what was useful and what was dangerous, what had been abandoned and what might be trapped. Her first real score had been an American observation post destroyed by Taliban mortars 2 years before her arrival. The soldiers had evacuated in a hurry, leaving behind equipment that had been written off as combat losses. She'd found intact communications gear, encryption modules, solar charging equipment, and enough MREs to last 3 months. She'd carried it all back to her cave over the course of 2 weeks, making the journey at night, erasing her tracks, never taking the same route twice. The rifle had taken 2 years to complete. Her original M1 antenna had been destroyed in the blast that ended Operation Broken Ridge, and replacing it had become an obsession that kept her sane during the long months of isolation. She'd collected components from a dozen different weapons: barrels, receivers, triggers, stocks, machining parts by hand using tools she'd fabricated from scrap metal. The work was painstaking, requiring precision that pushed the limits of what could be achieved without proper equipment. The barrel had come from a Soviet-era Dragunov she'd found in a collapsed Taliban bunker, still in its Cosmoline wrapping, never fired. The receiver she'd machined from a block of steel, scavenged from a destroyed vehicle, spending 3 months filing and fitting until the tolerances were acceptable. The stock she'd carved from hardwood she'd cured over 2 winters, shaping it to fit her shoulder perfectly, inletting it for the action with patience that bordered on madness. The scope had been the hardest part. She'd salvaged optics from 3 different sources, combining elements until she had something that could hold zero and provide the magnification she needed. The adjustments had taken another 6 months of patient calibration, firing test shots at measured distances, adjusting, firing again. The final product was ugly, rough, obviously handmade. It looked nothing like the precision instrument she'd carried in the army, but it shot beautifully. 3/4 MOA at 500 meters, consistent and reliable, an extension of her will that could reach out and touch targets at distances most shooters couldn't even see. She'd named it Ghost. It seemed appropriate. The 3rd winter brought the closest call. A Taliban patrol, 6 men moving through the high passes on some mission she never learned, had stumbled onto one of her supply caches. A shallow cave 2 kilometers from her main position, where she'd stored ammunition and dried food against the possibility of having to abandon her primary shelter. She'd watched from a ridge 200 meters away as the men rifled through her supplies, arguing in Pashto about what to do with their discovery. Some wanted to take everything and leave. Others suspected a trap. The leader, a scarred man with a gray beard, had studied the supplies with the careful attention of a professional soldier. He'd recognized the organization, the careful labeling, the rotation of stock. This wasn't a random cache. This was someone's survival system. They'd decided to set an ambush, wait for whoever owned this cache to return. Kira had watched them position themselves with something close to admiration. They were good, patient, disciplined, the kind of fighters who'd survived 2 decades of war against the most powerful military in the world. But she was better. She'd waited them out. 3 days in a snow hole she'd dug with hands that had gone numb hours ago, eating nothing, drinking snowmelt, watching through a gap no wider than her fist. Her body temperature had dropped to dangerous levels. Her thoughts had become slow, sluggish, focused entirely on the men below. On the third night, the patrol had finally given up. The cold was killing them faster than patience could sustain. They'd gathered their equipment and moved on, cursing the waste of time, never knowing how close they'd come to finding what they sought. Kira had waited another full day before moving. Then she'd relocated the cache, established 3 new supply points, and never used any single location for more than 2 months again. She'd learned from that mistake. Never keep all supplies in one location. Never establish patterns. Never assume safety, even in places that seem secure. The mountains were patient. They would kill anyone who forgot that. The 4th year brought illness. Some kind of infection, she never knew what exactly, had left her burning with fever for 2 weeks. Delirious, helpless, trapped in her cave while her body fought battles she couldn't see or control. She'd survived through luck more than skill. The fever had broken just as her water ran out, giving her enough strength to crawl to the stream that fed her shelter. She'd drunk until her stomach cramped, then collapsed on the bank and slept for 16 hours. After recovering, she'd established emergency protocols, hidden caches of antibiotics and water at 3 locations within crawling distance of her main shelter. Backup supplies, backup plans for backup plans. Survival wasn't about strength or skill. It was about anticipating every way things could go wrong, then preparing for 3 more. The hardest moment came in her 2nd year. She'd rigged a radio receiver to monitor armed forces network broadcasts, partly for intelligence value, partly because the sound of American voices helped her remember who she'd been before the mountains had started to remake her. Most of the programming was meaningless. Music she didn't recognize, news from a world that seemed impossibly distant, sports scores for games she couldn't imagine caring about. Then she'd heard the memorial broadcast. Today marks 1 year since the loss of 5 American soldiers in Operation Broken Ridge. Staff Sergeant Kyle Bennett, Specialist Megan Shaw, Corporal James Caldwell, PFC Thomas Whitmore, and Sergeant Kira Holloway gave their lives in service to their country. They are remembered today by families, friends, and fellow service members who will never forget their sacrifice. The names hit her like bullets. Bennett, Shaw, Caldwell, Whitmore, her team, her friends, her responsibility. Then her own name, Sergeant Kira Holloway, spoken in past tense, memorialized, mourned, forgotten. The broadcast continued with interviews. Sharon Bennett speaking through tears about the husband who would never come home, the father her daughters would only know through photographs and stories, the children he would never see grow up, the empty chair at the dinner table that would remain empty forever. In a child's voice, 7 years old, maybe 8, asking a question that shattered something in Kira's chest. "Mommy, when is Daddy coming home?" That night, alone in her cave with the radio silent, in the darkness pressing in from all sides, Kira had held her Beretta M9 against her chin. The metal was cold, the trigger smooth under her finger, the solution simple, elegant, final. One squeeze and the pain would stop, the guilt would stop, the endless grinding isolation would stop. She'd sat there for hours, the pistol pressed against her flesh, waiting for the courage to end it. Instead, she'd remembered Colonel Marcus Webb standing on the firing range at Fort Bragg, watching a young sniper candidate put 10 consecutive rounds through a hole the size of a quarter at 500 meters. "Holloway, you've got instincts that can't be taught, natural talent that most shooters would kill for. But talent means nothing without purpose. Your mission isn't to be the best shooter in the Army. Your mission is to live long enough to use what you've been given when it matters most." When it matters most. Kira had lowered the pistol, set it aside on the cold stone floor, picked up her field notebook and begun writing. Names, dates, suspicions, the beginning of a mission she hadn't known she was accepting. Someone had betrayed them. Someone had sent her team to die. Someone was still out there, still wearing a uniform, still making decisions that got soldiers killed. Finding the truth wouldn't bring Bennett back, wouldn't restore Shaw or Caldwell or Whitmore to the families that mourned them, wouldn't fill the empty chairs or answer the questions from children who would never understand. But it would mean something. It would matter. And if Kira had to stay dead to make it happen, she would be the most patient ghost the Hindu Kush had ever known. The intelligence accumulated slowly, piece by piece, over years of careful work. During her first year of intentional survival, Kira had established listening posts at key points along the mountain passes. Intercepting radio communications between enemy forces and whoever was providing them with information had become her primary mission. The encryption was sophisticated, but patterns emerged over time. Frequencies used at specific hours, transmission schedules that correlated with American operational tempo, code words repeated across multiple intercepts. Someone inside the American military was talking to the enemy. Someone with access to operational planning, patrol schedules, supply routes. Someone high enough in the chain of command to know things that got soldiers killed. She'd begun keeping meticulous records. Every intercept logged with time, frequency, and content. Every anomaly noted and cross-referenced. Every piece of data that might eventually form a picture of who had sold out her team. The breakthrough came in her third year. A transmission intercepted during routine patrol monitoring had used encryption she'd never seen before on enemy channels. American encryption, the kind of sophisticated protocol used for sensitive military communications between senior officers. Kira had spent 6 weeks breaking the code, working from fragments and intuition and the specialized training she'd received years earlier. When she'd finally cracked it, the contents had confirmed her worst suspicions. Colonel Vivian Ashford was running an intelligence network that sold American operational data to the Haqqani network. Patrol routes, supply schedules, troop movements, names of informants and interpreters. Everything needed to set up ambushes, assassinate collaborators, and turn American operations into killing grounds. Operation Broken Ridge hadn't been a mission gone wrong. It had been a deliberate execution. Bennett's team had stumbled onto evidence of Ashford's dealings during their pre-mission reconnaissance. They'd found documents in an abandoned compound, financial records, communication logs, payment schedules that connected senior American officers to weapons shipments and cash transfers. They'd followed protocol, reported their discovery through proper channels, trusted the system. They'd reported it to Colonel Ashford, who had responded by sending them into an ambush designed to eliminate everyone who knew about her activities. 5 soldiers sent to die so that her secrets could stay buried. Everyone except Kira. The irony wasn't lost on her. Ashford had tried to bury the truth with the bodies of 5 soldiers. Instead, she created a witness who had nothing left to lose, unlimited time to gather evidence, and the skills to survive in conditions that would kill anyone less determined. Kira documented everything. Radio intercepts with timestamps and frequency data, photographs of documents recovered from enemy positions, showing the scope of the intelligence network. Financial records accessed through equipment she'd salvaged and modified, tracing money flows through offshore accounts and shell companies. 5 years of patient, meticulous work. 5 years of surviving alone in hostile territory while assembling a case that would destroy a decorated officer and expose corruption at the highest levels. All she needed was the right moment to deliver it. The storm on Ridge 17 gave her that opportunity. Kira had been watching the valley for 3 days when Lieutenant Brennan's team arrived. She'd observed them establish their observation post, monitored their communications, noted their tactical deployment with professional approval. Good soldiers, well-trained, operating under conditions that would break lesser teams. When the blizzard hit and the enemy sniper began engaging, Kira had initially planned to stay hidden. This wasn't her fight anymore. These weren't her people. She'd spent 5 years learning to survive by never getting involved in battles that didn't serve her mission. Then she'd seen a face through her scope that changed everything. The young soldier moving under fire, helping his teammates reach cover while bullets cracked around him, was the mirror image of someone she'd watched die 5 years earlier. Same build, same movement patterns, same determined set to the jaw that suggested stubbornness bordering on stupidity. Nathan Caldwell. The personnel files she'd intercepted identified him as a specialist in Brennan's unit. Brother of Corporal James Caldwell, who had died in Operation Broken Ridge while Kira watched helplessly from a burning ridge. She'd failed to save the brother. She'd spent 5 years carrying that failure like a stone in her chest. She would not fail again. The shot was instinctive, 743 meters through near-zero visibility, compensating for wind and temperature, and the thousand variables that made long-range shooting in these conditions theoretically impossible. The enemy sniper dropped before his next round could chamber. Then Kira made the decision that would end her exile. The radio call to command was the first time she'd spoken to another human being in over a year. Her voice sounded alien to her own ears, rough and damaged by cold and disuse. But the authentication codes worked. The coordinates were verified. The artillery strike succeeded. And Colonel Ashford heard a ghost speak. Now Kira moved through the snow toward Fob Copperhead, carrying 5 years of evidence in a waterproof pouch against her chest. The weight of paper and electronics was nothing compared to the weight of the memories she carried, the faces of her dead teammates, the sound of Sharon Bennett's grief over the radio, the question from a little girl who would never see her father again. Some weights never got lighter. You just learned to carry them. 300 meters from the base perimeter, Kira identified a problem. Boot prints in the fresh snow. At least 6 people, moving in tactical formation toward the base. The tracks were fresh, less than an hour old, and partially obscured by the continuing snowfall, suggesting the group had tried to hide their approach. Enemy fighters, the remnants of the unit she'd called artillery strikes on, regrouping for a final assault. They'd followed the logical escape route from their destroyed positions. They'd gathered their survivors, and they'd decided that if they were going to die today, they would take some Americans with them. Kira settled into a shooting position behind a rock formation, assembling her rifle with movements she could perform in total darkness. The range was 280 meters, wind from the left at 15 kilometers per hour, temperature well below freezing, affecting ballistics in ways she'd learned to calculate through endless practice. 6 targets, 6 rounds. She controlled her breathing. 4 counts in, hold, 4 counts out. Heart rate dropped to resting levels. Vision sharpened until she could see individual details on the distant figures, the vapor of their breath, the weight of their weapons, the exact moment each one would die. First shot, the point man dropped without sound, his body crumpling forward into the snow. Second shot, the machine gunner spun and fell before he could deploy his weapon, the heavy gun tumbling from his dead hands. Third shot, the team leader crumpled mid-stride, whatever orders he'd been about to give dying in his throat. Fourth shot, the RPG specialist lost his grip on the launcher that would never fire. The remaining 2 fighters broke and ran, abandoning tactical discipline for pure survival instinct. They fled toward the mountains, toward safety, toward lives they would get to keep. Kira tracked them through her scope, watched them disappear into the falling snow. She let them go. She'd killed enough for 1 lifetime. She'd killed enough for 10 lifetimes, but she would complete her mission, whatever it cost. The base perimeter was lit by floodlights that turned falling snow into a wall of white. Security teams had deployed along the fence line, weapons ready, faces tense with uncertainty. They'd heard the shots. They were expecting trouble. What they weren't expecting was a woman in white camouflage walking calmly out of the storm with her hands raised. Colonel Marcus Webb stood at the gate, flanked by 6 soldiers whose weapons were lowered but ready. He'd come personally because some things couldn't be delegated, because some ghosts deserved to be welcomed home by someone who remembered them. The woman approaching looked nothing like the soldier he'd trained 8 years ago. Kira Holloway had been fit and confident, moving with the easy grace of someone who knew exactly what her body could do. The figure emerging from the blizzard was gaunt, weathered, marked by years of exposure and violence that had left their signatures across her face and hands. Her hair had gone gray at the temples. Lines that hadn't existed before carved deep grooves around her eyes and mouth. Her hands showed the damage of frostbite and repetitive injury, fingers that had been broken and healed without proper setting. But her eyes were the same, cold, precise, missing nothing. She stopped 10 meters from the gate, hands still raised, and spoke in a voice that sounded like gravel over broken glass. Staff Sergeant Kira Holloway, service number 8472-65, reporting as ordered, sir. Webb felt something shift in his chest. Not quite grief, not quite joy, some mixture of both that left him struggling for words. "We buried you," he finally managed. "5 years ago, there was a memorial at Arlington. Your name is on the wall." "Seemed premature," she said. Her expression gave nothing away. "Walk me through the 5 years, from the ambush to right now." "That's going to take a while, sir." She lowered her hands slowly, reaching into her jacket. Several guards raised their weapons. Webb waved them down. Kira produced a waterproof pouch, held it out toward him. "The short version is in here. 5 years of evidence. Radio intercepts, financial records, operational data. Everything needed to prove that Colonel Vivian Ashford has been selling intelligence to the Haqqani network since at least 2018. Webb took the pouch but didn't open it. His eyes stayed on Kira's face, reading the truth written there in scars and exhaustion and determination that had survived 5 years of impossible circumstances. Operation Broken Ridge was an execution. Bennett's team found evidence of Ashford's activities during pre-mission reconnaissance. They reported it through proper channels. Ashford responded by sending them into an ambush designed to kill everyone who knew. Kira's voice remained steady, but Webb saw something flicker behind her eyes. Old pain, carefully controlled. "I survived by accident. I stayed dead by choice. I spent 5 years gathering proof because I knew no one would believe me without it." "Why now? You could have stayed hidden, stayed safe." Kira looked past him toward the base, toward the lights that represented everything she'd once been part of. "Because I watched Brennan's team almost die on that ridge. Because staying hidden wasn't protecting anyone. It was just letting Ashford keep operating, keep making decisions, keep getting soldiers killed." She paused and something changed in her expression. Something that might have been vulnerability, quickly suppressed. "Because Nathan Caldwell was in that unit. His brother died in Broken Ridge. I couldn't save James. I wasn't going to let Nathan die too." Webb absorbed that, filed it away, and made a series of decisions that would define everything that followed. "The intelligence you provided saved 8 lives tonight. The artillery strikes you called destroyed positions that would have overrun Brennan's team by morning." He gestured toward the gate. "Whatever else happens, you've already proven yourself. But I need to know, can you prove what you're claiming about Ashford? Prove it in a way that will hold up to court-martial standards?" Kira's gaze met his directly, steady, certain. "I can prove it. Every transmission logged with time and frequency data. Every document photographed with chain of custody notes. Every financial transfer traced to accounts she controls." She paused. "I've been building this case since the night my team died. I've had 5 years to make sure it's airtight." Webb nodded slowly. "Then let's get you inside. Get you food, medical attention, whatever you need." He turned to one of the guards. "Find Colonel Ashford. Tell her I need to see her immediately regarding urgent intelligence matters." He looked back at Kira. "Welcome home, Sergeant." She walked past him through the gate, shoulders straight despite exhaustion, head high despite everything she'd endured. "Thank you, sir," she said quietly. "But I stopped thinking of this as home a long time ago." The operations center fell silent when Kira Holloway walked through the door. Soldiers who'd been focused on their screens looked up and stared. Some recognized the name that had circulated through the base in the hours since her radio transmission. Others simply saw a woman who looked like she'd been fighting a war by herself for longer than any human being should have to. Both observations were accurate. Colonel Webb led her to a secure briefing room, away from curious eyes and listening ears. He'd already dispatched military intelligence officers to begin verifying the evidence she'd provided. The preliminary review had taken less than an hour to confirm what Kira already knew. The case against Ashford was comprehensive, damning, and legally unassailable. Now they waited. Kira sat in a chair that felt strange after years of sleeping on stone. The warmth of the heated room was almost painful against skin that had adapted to constant cold. Someone had brought her food, standard military rations that tasted like paradise after years of scavenged supplies, and coffee that she drank slowly, savoring warmth that had become a distant memory. Webb sat across from her, reviewing documents on a tablet, occasionally asking questions that she answered with the precision of someone who'd rehearsed this conversation in her head for 5 years. The financial records show payments totaling over $4 million across 6 years. he said, scrolling through files. You access these through captured equipment? Modified communications gear from destroyed positions. Took me 18 months to crack the encryption, but once I was in, I could monitor all traffic on their secure frequency. Kira's voice was calm, professional. Ashford wasn't careful enough. She assumed anyone who could compromise her operation would be killed before they could report it. She almost got that right. Almost only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. Kira set down her coffee cup. Not in intelligence work. Before Webb could respond, the door opened. Military police entered first, followed by intelligence officers, followed by Colonel Vivian Ashford in handcuffs. Ashford looked older than Kira remembered. The 5 years had carved deep lines around her eyes, turned her hair steel gray, given her the hollow look of someone who'd spent too long carrying secrets that weighed more than any human being could bear. She walked between her escorts with rigid military bearing, refusing to let captivity diminish her dignity. Then she saw Kira, and everything changed. Her face went through a rapid series of transformations: disbelief, recognition, fear, and finally a cold, calculating hatred that stripped away every pretense of composure. You! The word came out like poison. You were supposed to die. The whole point was that you were supposed to die with the rest of them. Kira stood slowly, facing the woman who had murdered her team. You made one mistake, Colonel. You assumed I'd stay dead. 5 years. Ashford's voice cracked with something between rage and desperation. 5 years I've been looking over my shoulder, wondering if somehow, impossibly, you'd survived. Every time intelligence reported unusual activity in the mountains, every unexplained enemy casualty, I wondered. But they assured me no one could survive that long alone. No one. They were wrong. Kira stepped closer, her voice flat and emotionless. I had motivation. I had time. And I had 4 dead friends who deserved justice. Ashford lunged against her restraints, her composure shattering completely. You don't understand anything. Do you know what's at stake? The networks, the operations, the arrangements I've helped maintain. I understand exactly what you've accomplished. Kira cut her off, her voice sharp as a blade. 217 American and Allied soldiers dead because you sold their movements to the enemy. Patrol routes compromised. Supply convoys ambushed. Operations betrayed before they even began. She paused, letting the number sink in. 217. I counted every single one while I was waiting in those mountains. Every name, every face I could find, every family that got a folded flag instead of a homecoming. Ashford's face twisted with something between defiance and despair. You think this is about money? You think I did this for profit? There are arrangements, relationships, necessities that people like you could never possibly understand. I understand enough. Kira stepped closer still, close enough that the MPs tensed but didn't intervene. I understand that Kyle Bennett had 2 daughters who are growing up without a father. I understand that Megan Shaw's parents buried an empty casket because there wasn't enough left of their daughter to send home. I understand that James Caldwell died 20 meters from where I was lying, and I watched because I couldn't move, couldn't help, couldn't do anything except survive. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but every word carried the weight of 5 years of isolation and determination. You took everything from them, their futures, their families, their chance to grow old and see their children's children. You took it all to protect your secrets and your money and whatever other arrangements you made with murderers. She paused, her eyes locked on Ashford's face. And now I've taken everything from you. Your freedom, your reputation, your future. Everything you built on the bodies of American soldiers is gone. Ashford stared at her with something that might have been respect, mixed with hatred that would never fade. You won't have peace, Holloway. Even if they execute me, the people I worked with will know your name. They'll never stop hunting you. You'll spend the rest of your life. Let them come. Kira stepped back, her expression unchanged. I've been waiting for death for 5 years. One more enemy won't make a difference. She turned her back on Ashford, a deliberate gesture, a final dismissal, and nodded to the MPs. Get her out of my sight. As they led Ashford toward the door, she twisted in their grip one final time. This isn't over, Holloway. Kira didn't turn around. For you, Colonel, it's been over for 5 years. You just didn't know it. The investigation took 48 hours. Webb brought in military intelligence, counterintelligence, and legal officers from 3 different commands. They worked around the clock, verifying Kira's evidence against classified records, cross-referencing her intercepts with known enemy operations, interviewing personnel who'd been involved in missions Ashford had overseen. The pattern was devastating. Ashford had been providing intelligence to enemy forces for at least 7 years, receiving payment through offshore accounts hidden behind layers of shell companies. She'd compromised dozens of operations, gotten at least 217 soldiers killed, and covered her tracks by classifying mission files so heavily that no investigator had ever looked twice. Operation Broken Ridge had been her worst mistake, sending an entire team to their deaths when a subtler solution might have avoided notice. But by then, Ashford had been desperate. Cornered by Bennett's discovery of her dealings with the Haqqani network, she'd gambled that killing everyone who knew would solve her problem permanently. She'd lost that gamble the moment Kira Holloway survived. The court-martial was swift by military standards. 3 weeks from arrest to verdict, Colonel Vivian Ashford was found guilty of treason, espionage, and multiple counts of conspiracy to commit murder. The evidence Kira had gathered proved devastating. Radio intercepts documenting years of intelligence sales, financial records tracing millions of dollars, operational data connecting her betrayals to hundreds of deaths. The sentence was death by lethal injection, to be carried out within 60 days. Kira watched the verdict from a seat in the back of the military courtroom, wearing dress uniform for the first time in over 5 years. The fabric felt strange against skin that had grown accustomed to camouflage and survival gear. The formality felt alien after years of existing in silence, but she'd come because she owed it to the dead, to Bennett and Shaw and Caldwell and Whitmore, to the 217 others whose names she'd memorized during her years in the mountains, to all the families who finally knew the truth about why their loved ones had died. Justice had been served. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like the end of a very long war, leaving behind exhaustion instead of celebration. The memorial service at Arlington was held 3 weeks after the verdict, on a gray November day that seemed to remember the soldiers it honored. Kira stood with the families of her fallen teammates, wearing her dress uniform for what she'd decided would be the last time. Sharon Bennett held her daughter's hands throughout the ceremony, the older girl solemn and quiet, the younger one confused by the gravity of what she was witnessing. The parents of Megan Shaw sat rigid in their grief, accepting condolences from strangers who couldn't possibly understand what they'd lost. The Whitmore family filled 3 rows of chairs, their collective presence a testament to the man they'd loved, and Nathan Caldwell stood near the front, representing a family that had now lost 2 sons to the same war. The chaplain spoke words that carried more weight than they had at the original memorial 5 years ago. The truth had transformed everything. These soldiers hadn't died in a mission gone wrong. They died because they discovered a traitor, and she'd killed them for it. They died as heroes, even if no one had known it until now. When the ceremony ended, Kira found Sharon Bennett standing by her husband's grave marker, newly updated to reflect the true circumstances of his death. "Mrs. Bennett." Kira's voice was rough with emotion she struggled to control. "I'm Kira Holloway. I served with your husband." Sharon turned to face her. The years had been hard. Grief had carved lines that shouldn't exist on a face barely into its 40s. But she held herself with dignity, a military wife who'd learned to carry burdens that civilians couldn't imagine. "You're the one who survived." It wasn't an accusation, just a statement. "The one who brought the evidence." "Yes, ma'am. I thought about you." Sharon's voice was steady, but tears tracked slowly down her face. "During all those years, I wondered if you might be alive somewhere. Kyle used to say you were too stubborn to die." A small, sad smile crossed her face. He was right. Kira didn't know how to respond. She'd expected anger, resentment, questions about why she'd survived when Kyle hadn't. The gentle acceptance in Sharon's voice was harder to bear than accusations would have been. Sharon reached out and took her hand. "Thank you for surviving, for gathering the evidence, for making sure the truth came out." Her grip tightened. Kyle would have wanted that. He would have wanted at least one of you to come home. A small hand tugged at Kira's uniform jacket. She looked down to find the younger Bennett daughter, Lily according to the name tag, pinned to her black dress, staring up at her with serious eyes. "Are you the soldier who lived in the mountains?" the girl asked. Kira crouched to meet her gaze. "Yes, for a long time." "Were you scared?" The question was simple, direct, the kind of honesty only children possessed. Kira considered protecting this child from the truth of what fear really meant. Instead, she answered honestly, "Every day, but I had work to do, important work that couldn't wait until I felt better." Lily nodded solemnly, processing that information with the gravity of a child confronting adult realities. Then she reached into the pocket of her dress and produced a folded piece of paper. "I made this for you." Kira unfolded it carefully. A crayon drawing showed a figure in white standing on a mountain, looking down at a valley filled with flowers. Above the figure, in careful letters, were the words, "Thank you for bringing Daddy home." Something cracked in Kira's chest. Not pain, something warmer, something she'd forgotten could exist. "This is beautiful," she managed, her voice thick. "I'll keep it forever." Lily smiled, the expression transforming her small face. "Mommy says heroes are people who do hard things when they're scared. You're a hero." Kira looked at Sharon, who was watching the exchange with tears streaming freely. "You raised a good daughter," Kira said softly. "Kyle would be proud." "I know." Sharon pulled Lily close. "He's watching. Wherever he is, he's watching. And he's proud of all of us." Nathan Caldwell found her after the ceremony, standing alone near the memorial wall where her name had once been carved. He was taller than his brother had been, broader through the shoulders, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent years in harsh conditions. But his eyes were James's eyes. The same intensity, the same determination. "Sergeant Holloway," he straightened slightly, a gesture of respect. "I wanted to thank you properly for what you did on Ridge 17, for what you did for my brother. I couldn't save him." The words came out before she could stop them, carrying 5 years of guilt. "I tried. I watched through my scope while the mortar hit his position. If I'd been faster, if I'd—" "You did what you could." Nathan's voice was firm, cutting through her self-recrimination. "You survived. You gathered evidence. You brought justice for everyone who died that night." He paused, struggling with emotion. "James wrote home about you, said you were the best shooter in the unit, said if everything went sideways, you were the one person he'd want covering his back. He was a good soldier," Kira said quietly. "He deserved better than what happened. He got justice. Because of you." Nathan reached into his jacket and produced a small wooden box. "The families wanted you to have this. Sharon Bennett's idea." Kira opened the box carefully. Inside, resting on velvet, was a challenge coin, the kind units gave to members who'd proven themselves in combat. But this one was custom-made, unique. On one side, an inscription circled the edge. "Broken Ridge, never forgotten." Below it, the names of the fallen: Bennett, Shaw, Caldwell, Whitmore. On the other side, a single word: Holloway. "There are only 5 in existence," Nathan explained. "One for each family and one for you. You're part of this family now, whether you want to be or not." Kira stared at the coin, feeling its weight in her palm. Such a small thing. Such an enormous meaning. "Tell them thank you," she managed finally. "Tell them it means more than I can say." Nathan nodded. "Take care of yourself, Sergeant. You've earned the right to peace." He extended his hand. They shook, a brief, formal gesture, weighted with everything that had happened and everything that couldn't be undone. Kira watched him walk away, the challenge coin still in her palm, and thought about what it meant to belong to something again. Colonel Webb found her later, standing at the edge of the cemetery, looking out at rows of white headstones that stretched toward the horizon. "The Army wants to give you a Silver Star," he said, stopping beside her, "for your actions over the past 5 years. Intelligence gathering under impossible conditions, the shots that saved Brennan's team, the single-handed disruption of an enemy network. They're also talking about a promotion to first sergeant." "I don't want it." The words came quickly, automatically. "I figured." Webb reached into his jacket and produced a letter on official stationery. "They're also prepared to restore your full service record. Back pay for 5 years. Medical benefits. Retirement eligibility whenever you want it. He paused, letting that sink in. An authorization to declassify your experiences at your discretion. If you ever want to tell your story, write a book, give interviews, whatever, you can do so without violating any security protocols. Your story is yours to tell. Kira took the letter but didn't open it. What I want is to stop being a soldier. I know, Webb nodded slowly. You've earned that right. More than anyone I've ever known in 30 years of service. He was quiet for a moment, watching the distant mountains that marked the edge of the cemetery. There's something else you should know. The network Ashford was working with has been largely dismantled. We've rolled up cells in 4 countries, disrupted operations that would have cost hundreds of lives, restored security to units that didn't even know they were compromised. He paused. None of it would have been possible without your work. Kira absorbed that information without reaction. Numbers, statistics, lives saved in the abstract. It should have felt meaningful. Instead, it just felt like accounting, tallying results that could never balance against what had been lost. What will you do now? Webb asked. She considered the question. It was strange thinking about a future. For 5 years, she'd existed in an eternal present. Survive today, plan for tomorrow. Don't think about next month or next year. The concept of life beyond the mission was almost impossible to grasp. Find somewhere quiet, she finally said. Somewhere with mountains. Learn how to sleep without one eye open. Figure out who I am when I'm not fighting. Take your time. Webb extended his hand. And if you ever need anything, anything at all, you know how to reach me. Some soldiers never really retire. They just rest until the next mission. They shook hands, a simple gesture, but waited with everything that had happened between them. Teacher and student, commander and soldier. 2 people who understood things about sacrifice and duty that most civilians would never comprehend. Thank you, sir, for believing me when it would have been easier not to. I trained you, Holloway. I knew what you were capable of. A slight smile crossed his weathered face. I just didn't know exactly how capable until you proved it. 6 months later, Kira Holloway sat on the porch of a cabin in Montana, watching the sun set over mountains that reminded her of nothing except beauty. The cabin was small, isolated, accessible only by a dirt road that became impassable 4 months of the year. She'd bought it with back pay that had accumulated during her years as a ghost, choosing it specifically for its clear sightlines, multiple exit routes, and the kind of quiet that let a person think without interruption. Old habits died hard. Maybe they never died at all. But other things were changing, slowly, in small ways that accumulated over weeks and months until she barely recognized herself anymore. She slept more than she had in years. The nightmares still came, woke her reaching for weapons that weren't there, left her sitting in darkness until her heart stopped racing. But the gaps between bad nights were growing longer. Sometimes she slept until dawn. Sometimes she even dreamed of things that weren't death. She'd started cooking again, real meals with fresh ingredients, following recipes from books she'd ordered online. The simple act of preparing food, of choosing what to make, and taking time to make it well, had become a form of meditation. Kira Holloway, sniper and ghost, standing in a kitchen with flour on her hands, making bread. Bennett would have laughed himself sick at that image. The thought brought a smile to her face, small, unexpected, but real. The mailbox at the end of her dirt road usually contained nothing but catalogs addressed to the cabin's previous owner. But today there had been a package with familiar handwriting. She opened it on her porch as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. Inside was a photograph and a letter. The photograph showed the memorial wall at Arlington, the section where her name had once been carved. The granite was smooth now, her name removed. In its place, a small bronze plaque, in honor of those who completed their mission when completion seemed impossible. The letter was from Colonel Webb. Holloway, the memorial committee wanted you to have this. Your name has been officially removed from the Wall of the Fallen. You're listed as retired now with full honors. The plaque was my idea. I thought you'd appreciate being remembered for what you accomplished rather than what almost happened to you. I'm still training shooters, 12 of them right now, working through the advanced course. I use your service record as an example of what dedication and patience can achieve. They don't believe half of it. They don't have to. They just have to try to be worthy of the standard you set. The network we dismantled has stayed dismantled. New protocols prevent the kind of compromise Ashford exploited. Security has been restored to units across 3 theaters. Soldiers are coming home who might not have otherwise. That's your legacy, Sergeant. Not the shots you took, the lives you saved. Whatever you're doing out there, I hope you found something like peace. You've earned it. But if you ever need anything, or if the country ever needs you again, you know where to find me. Some soldiers never really retire. They just rest until the next mission. Take care of yourself. That's an order. Cabri. Kira read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and set it aside. The sunset was painting the Montana sky in colors that had nothing to do with explosions or tracer fire. A hawk circled in the distance, riding thermals with the kind of patience she'd once used for very different purposes. She thought about Bennett, about Shaw, about James Caldwell and Whitmore. 4 soldiers who would never see another sunset, never hold their families, never grow old in quiet places where war couldn't reach them. She thought about Nathan Caldwell, who'd written her a letter last month describing his promotion to sergeant and his engagement to a woman he'd met at a deployment ceremony. Life continuing, hope surviving. She thought about Lily Bennett's crayon drawing, which hung on her cabin wall in a frame she'd made herself. She thought about the challenge coin in her pocket, a weight she carried everywhere now, a reminder that she belonged to something larger than herself. Some weights never got lighter. You just learned to carry them differently. 3 months after settling into the cabin, she received an unexpected visitor. Nathan Caldwell's truck appeared on her dirt road on a Sunday afternoon, dust trailing behind it like a memory of things past. He stepped out carrying a small package and an expression that suggested he'd driven a very long way to deliver something important. Sergeant Holloway. He nodded in greeting. Hope I'm not intruding. You drove 14 hours to not intrude? A small smile crossed his face. Fair point. He held out the package. I wanted to bring you this in person. Didn't feel right to mail it. Inside the package was a framed photograph. The Bennett family, Sharon and the 2 girls, standing in front of their house. Lily was holding up a piece of paper with writing on it. Miss you, Sergeant Kira. Come visit soon. Sharon wanted you to know you're always welcome, Nathan explained. Holidays, birthdays, anytime you need family. Family. The word hit her differently than it would have a year ago. Before, it had meant obligation, expectation, things she couldn't live up to. Now it meant something else, something she was still learning to understand. Tell them thank you, she said. Tell them I might take them up on that. Nathan nodded. He looked out at the Montana mountains, breathed deep of the clean air. It's beautiful up here. I can see why you chose it. It's quiet. I needed quiet for a while. You've earned it. He extended his hand. Take care of yourself, Sergeant. And remember, family looks after family. You're part of ours now. Kira shook his hand, feeling something warm spread through her chest. Not quite belonging. She wasn't sure she'd ever fully feel that again. But something close. Something that might grow into peace, given enough time. She watched him drive away, the photograph still in her hands, and thought about what it meant to be part of something again. The nightmares came that night, as they always did. She woke at a 300, heart pounding, hands reaching for weapons that weren't there. The darkness pressed in from all sides, full of shadows that might have been enemies, might have been memories, might have been nothing at all. She lay still until her breathing steadied, then got up and made coffee, carried it to the porch, sat in the darkness and watched the stars wheel overhead until dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. Some patterns couldn't be broken. Some habits were too deeply ingrained to change. She would always wake before dawn. She would always scan for threats in every new environment. She would always carry the weight of what she'd done in what she'd failed to do. But she was learning to carry it differently now. The sun rose over the Montana mountains, painting the peaks gold and pink. Somewhere in the distance, an elk called to its herd. The coffee grew cold in her hands, forgotten. Kira Holloway had spent 5 years as a ghost, dead to everyone who'd ever known her. She'd survived through stubbornness and skill and a refusal to let the people who'd wronged her win. She'd come home carrying proof that had destroyed a traitor and saved lives beyond counting. Now she was learning something harder than survival, She was learning to live. The nightmares would come again tomorrow. They always did. But so would the sunrise. So would the quiet moments of unexpected peace. So would the letters from people who cared whether she lived or died. That was enough. That was more than enough. Kira stood, stretched muscles that still ached from years of abuse, and went inside to start breakfast. The photograph of the Bennett family had joined Lily's drawing on the wall. The challenge coin sat on the kitchen counter where she could see it while she cooked. Reminders that she wasn't alone anymore. Reminders that survival had been worth the cost. Behind her through the window, the mountains stood eternal and indifferent. They kept the secrets of everyone who'd ever walked their slopes, including the ghost who'd finally found her way home. Some soldiers never really retired, Webb had written. They just rested until the next mission. Maybe that was true. Maybe someday the phone would ring, and she'd answer it, and the rest she'd earned would end. But not today. Today she would make breakfast. She would drink coffee on her porch. She would watch the hawks circle and listen to the wind in the pines and remember that she was alive. Today that was enough. Tomorrow could take care of itself. The end.